Question for you when you get a second.
Oh, yes, go ahead. I can multitask.
Okay, my assistant moderator is in the kindergarten room,
Yeah,
and if you could at some point just explain to him what has to happen.
I can do that right now.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank
Okay.
you. Good. Yeah, his name's David. Thank you.
Way you can see who's in the room.
Yeah. I just wanted this to show. It's just the size. Yeah. Reviewing Adam Steele's screen. Okay. That's fine.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. It's such an unusual year. It's good to see you. Getting a little feedback. Hello? Hello? Okay. All right, that's better. Hi, good evening. My name is Pete, and I'm trying to say Pete. Okay. All right. I'm your school district moderator, and to support the schools. Thanks all for all your patience. It's been a very trying year. Unity for the school, parents, kids, the whole bit. We're doing the meeting here in the multi-purpose room. We have cranked the ventilation up on high, so we're just blowing in tons of fresh air. I do ask people to keep their masks on. It is required in this room. If for some reason someone did not want to wear a mask and wanted to participate in voting, we will allow that, but we'll be in a separate room that will still be able to participate. I thank everyone for wearing a mask. I hope you don't mind. I prefer not to wear the mask. You can hear me. So I'm going to call to order the 2021 Vernon School District Deliberative Session, which is governed by the official ballot referendum system, better known as SB2, for the Senate bill that enacted this procedure. And before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to rise for an invocation and then remain standing afterwards. I'll just say we gather to make our decisions on communities and schools. May we use only our best skills and judgment, keeping ourselves impartial and neutral as we consider the merits and pitfalls of each matter that is placed before us and act in accordance with what is best for our community and our fellow citizens. Thank you. Please remain standing. I'm going to introduce John Casey. John will be graduating from Sauhegan. He's attended the village school from kindergarten to 6th and then all the way through the Amherst and Sauhegan schools. After graduation, John is going to join the Army. And we're very proud of you, John. If you don't mind, John, I'd like to ask you to step on the X there, which is where anyone that speaks is being picked up by the microphone. And if you could lead us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all.
Thank you, John. Good luck, and we're proud of you. So this evening, the 2021 deliberative session, it's the first part of this meeting. The second part is really going to be on June 8th between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. in this room, where the voters will be able to vote on these warrant articles. We're not going to vote on any warrant articles today. The purpose of the deliberative is to just to determine the wording and the language and dollar amounts on the warrants themselves. Couple of things, please turn off your cell phones. This meeting is being broadcast and recorded on Zoom. The folks who can participate or who can watch it at home are watchers only. They're not allowed to vote on any of these amendments or articles or anything like that. I guess with that, I believe there will be a school board meeting after this. Is that, it typically is to yes, they will. Okay. Yeah, immediately after this, it's typically to approve the meeting. Okay. I want to introduce the school board and then the officials. Our chair, Sarah Lawrence, is not here tonight, but we do have our vice chair is Peter Eckhoff. Stephen O'Keefe, and Jessica Hinckley. Very good. Our school district clerk is not here tonight, Autumn Carina. However, that's Sue Ledger. Sue, raise your hand. So she is the acting clerk tonight. And our treasurer, who's not here, doesn't need to be here, is Lynn Jennings, who does a great service for us. I'd like to introduce the school district administration that's here. Our superintendent, Adam Steele. Assistant Superintendent, Christine Landerwell. Business Administrator, Michelle Couteau. Director of Student Services, Meg Mosham. Amy Facey. And you are, I don't remember your title or finance. Business Administrator. Elect, okay. So you will have the job next year. We appreciate that. Okay. Roger Preston he's in the back. He's the guy responsible for the building, and the fans are whirling away, blowing fresh air here for us tonight. I appreciate that. We also have some legal counsel here, Steve Bennett and Abby Tucker. In case things get a little heated, I guess. School budget committee this year was Karen Grum, Matt Doherty, Zach Ray, also Peter Eckhoff and Kim Roberge for the select board, the school board of selecting reps. They work really hard, and it's a job that it's almost thankless, but they literally dig into every bit of the budget. And it's not really that they approve or disapprove of the budget, but more they work with the administration to come up with a budget that everyone favors. I will say, if budget committee is something that would interest any of you, please see me, because I'm the person who's responsible for the budget committee together for the school. So the work tonight is to decide on the wording, including dollar amounts where appropriate on the article, on which all registered voters will have the opportunity to vote for. At today's session, under the SB2 rules, you're able to do two things. First, or we'll be able to do two things. First, we'll explain and debate each article. Second, we're going to take one of two courses on each article. The first course is to maintain the original wording of the article. There's no vote required if that's the case. It will be placed on the ballot. The second course of action would be to vote to amend a warrant. And if that amendment is approved, it will be placed on the warrant. And then the third thing, after each article, I'm going to ask for a motion to restrict reconsideration. If that is seconded and approved, if that motion is made, seconded, and approved, then there will be no opportunity in this meeting to go back and review something. For example, if after what's left, if two people stay and said, I want to reconsider article number 2, we can't do it. It's restricted. So there's the moderator's rules are in the package. I think I'll just go kind of summarize them. I see many faces I've seen before here today, but just one rule is this is your meeting, so I'm here to facilitate it, but if you don't like the way it's run, if you want to overrule me, that's fine. It's your meeting. If you do have any questions, statements, or comments to make, please step up. There's an X on the floor there that will pick you up. The camera will also pick you up. The camera is actually the little white thing that they call the owl. It looks like an owl, and it's watching you. It's watching every one of us right now. It's been cool. But if you do have a comment to make, please state your name and your address and state it clearly so that our minute taker can get that. That's very important for us. Only registered voters can vote on the articles, and the voters should have gotten a blue card. If you're a
registered voter and don't have a blue card, you can see the supervisors of the checklist. And did that. Each motion to amend will be voted on and settled before we go to another motion. We're not going to entertain, I will not entertain motions to amend, amendments to amendments to amendments. I think I had everything. Yeah. Are there any questions on the meeting and moderating rules? If not, let's proceed. Mr. Eckhoff, do you have a list of non-residents who will be called on to speak? Oh, you need to give my list because I sent it to Sarah. Tell you what, how about if I say it this way, Mr. Chair? I recognize several district employees and the attorneys who may be non-residents. I believe one of the attorneys, are you a voting resident? Perhaps, yes, you are. Who are allowed to speak to me. Would you like to move that the non-resident employees of the school district be allowed to speak at this meeting? I'm fine with it. Okay, you move it. Let's make a motion that they are. Okay. And do we have a second from the board? Steve O'Keefe, I second. Steve O'Keefe seconds that. So this is up for vote. Do we allow the non-resident employees of the school district to speak? All in favor, say aye. There's your blue card. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Go to article number 1 is really not article that is discussed in the deliberative session, so this will be placed on the ballot. I just mentioned that there are 2 school board member seats open, moderator, clerk, and treasurer. I do believe that there have been candidates filed for each of those seats. So, next slide, please. Now we'll take up article number 2. Let me read this. Shall the Mont Vernon School District raise and appropriate as an operating budget, not including appropriations by special warrant articles and other appropriations voted separately, the amount set forth in the budget posted with the warrant, or is a vote amended by a vote of the first session for purposes set forth therein, totaling $5,827,453. Should this article be defeated, the default budget will be $5,800,022,501, which is the same as last year, with certain adjustments required by previous action of the Mont Vernon School District or by law. For the governing body, they hold a special meeting in accordance with RSA 40:13 and X beyond to take up the issue of revised operating budget. As a majority vote is required. This was recommended by the school board 5-0 and recommended by the budget committee 4-0. The estimated tax impact of passing this article is $1.76 per thousand. The estimated tax impact of not passing is $1.74 per thousand. Mr. Chair, would the school board like to speak to this article?
And Mr. O'Keefe speak to it and as well as needed.
Great, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight. It's great to see democracy in action in your attendance here. I appreciate you myself, but the rest of the board, so thank you. Tonight, discussing article number 2, the operating budget. A couple things I wanted to just point out. Not only did the school board, but the budget committee also requested a pretty lean budget, trying to come up with very minimal increases due to the current pandemic that we're encountering. And I think we successfully accomplished that. And that's clearly represented in the unanimous support both by the school board and by the budget committee. We take a look at the summary here on the screen to just make sure I'm on the same page. The default budget versus the proposed budget has a very small incremental change. see that reflected here on this page. The difference between the two is $4,922, 0.1% increase over fiscal year 2021. This is above and beyond the mandated things that we're required to cover, which includes things like teacher contracts, special education costs, and contractual obligations of the action district. We take a look at the next particular page here, we can see that the increase from fiscal year 2021 budget, the default fiscal year 2022, and the proposed budget, it just represented a different format from a graph standpoint, just showing that the nominal increase. The total increase over the previous year is 5.7%, and I'll show you that on the next page. The appropriation comparison, fiscal year 21 versus 22, we can see here side by side, 5.7%, with the difference of $315,281. We see here the default calculation as opposed to fiscal year 2021. Tuition, which was the single largest driver of increases, and that's the tuition payments that we pay to the town of Amherst in the form of our middle school, our 7th and 8th graders, a 4.5% increase. Our special education costs, other than out of district, rose nominal 1%, also followed by state retirement system. The SEU appropriation was an increase of 0.3% due to some diligent budgeting through the budget committee at the SEU level as well. Salary contractual wages 0.3%, transportation 0.1%, food service 0.1%, other one-time expenses 0 was actually a reduction. Other employee benefits also a reduction, -2%. Health insurance -13,000 or -2%. Special warrant articles, which is the 50,000 capital reserve position that we are going to begin request this evening, as well as the special education district tuition, which was also down 1.3%. For those who attended the last SAE meeting, we had a great presentation from our special ed director articulating some major changes that she's implemented to the district, special ed program trying to rein in some of those costs and keep as many things in-house as we possibly can to help control that. What we see here is we see that nominal change as a result of the 4.7%. The next page, we see actually where the increases are coming in from the proposed budget. And most of them are facility repairs and maintenance, which is an increase to $17,638. Software changes, $3,079. We see some other reductions, technological equipment replacement, as well as other, as a result of the total net increase of $4,922 versus the default. And as you can see, the special warrant article request is the extra $50,000 that's proposed as a second warrant article discussed later. The next page is the budget composition. And so for a lot of folks that aren't necessarily accustomed to reviewing the school district budget, you can see here that the single largest cause of the expenses that we pay for this outstanding building go to salaries, or 33.9%. The second largest is our tuition obligations to the town of Amherst to educate 2 grades of our students. Everything else is pretty minuscule in terms of the percentage versus those 2 large obligations. So over 50% of our budget goes to salaries and tuition. Everything else is reduced in the small amounts. Benefits, of course, 17%. We can add that to the 33% salary side. Those are the true costs for these. As we scroll down to staffing levels, we made several changes several years ago to our staffing level, where I feel today, personally, and the rest of the board does, have our properly staffed and equipped to take care of the students that were really obligated to make sure they receive the best educational standard possible. And so we see no changes to those staffing levels into the budget for next year. We see teachers still in each one of our grades. We're continuing the 2 teachers per grade, and we're having an outstanding kindergarten experience. And our results that we're seeing from a testing standpoint pre-COVID were really properly reflecting those changes. And we had hoped to see that, obviously, in the COVID environment. Unfortunately, we saw some negative scores as a result of that. We're going to be working really hard to right as we move into 2020. As we get out to certified staffing, we actually see here that there were actually some minor changes over the years, but we're staying pretty consistent with fiscal year 2022 change. So we see here 2022 versus 2021, there's actually a slight change or modification to our food service line that we are allocating over to our SAU budget. We see here special education. Sorry, you're going to see the special food service in the next page. But everything else is pretty much consistent with where we've been from certified staff. We go down here to the next page, non-certified staffing, we see classroom assistants. This year, we're actually at zero, continuing the trend into fiscal year 2022. Administrative assistants, special education aides, custodians, computer IT, and food service, which represents the reduction in law from that based on labor rules and budgeting. Kitchen support staff is actually at $5 a day. Items that are not in the proposed budget, and these are things that as a school board and as a community, we're going to need to think about going forward, and that's the grounds repair and maintenance. So retaining wall on the basketball court, we're expecting that will be a cost roughly $20,000. And we're hoping that we can receive some assistance from our town, various trust funds, as we investigate and work with our trustees and the trust funds to see if there's any opportunities to access those funds to repair the wall by the basketball. Building repairs, the bathrooms across the library, $25,000, and removing and adding black light bulb to the closed loop system, add a closed loop inhibitor to $13,500. And then, of course, a server replacement that eventually needs to come up to the tune of $10,000. Those are items not currently in the proposed budget, but as a district, these are things that we need to start. And the next page is Karen Drum. I don't think she's in attendance this evening. I just want to thank her for her hard work, meeting late hours at night to really dive deep into these numbers. It's really great when we see community members come forward and volunteer their time to really share this exercise of making sure that we have an outstanding school system. And that's probably reflected by taking a look at the next page, the budget committee, working with Karen Drum, Jess Noonan, Matt Doherty, Zach Ray, of course, Selectman Roberge in the back, and Mr. Hackball, spending their time on those nights to assist. The budget review process actually entitled several meetings that were appointed by our school district administrator, Michelle. And those meeting workshops, as you can see on that page, were obviously, as you can see here, ending technically at 6, but frequently over. So their due diligence and their efforts were really, really strong that the taxpayers were protected and had their say in this process. And Mr. Moderator, that's all I have.
Thank you. So the board has discussed article number 2. Would the board like to move that the proposed ballot question for warrant article 2 is printed in the deliberative session information packet along with recommendations of the school board and budget committee, if any, be placed on the ballot?
Mr. Moderator,
Steve, okay? Makes that motion. Is that motion seconded by the board? Seconded by Mr. Eckert. Is there any questions from the public? Article number 2.
Hi, Kim Rivers, 35 Salisbury Road. So I have a couple of questions. The first is the driver of the tuition. On your staffing levels, you don't give the 7th and 8th grade last year's are proposed. So is it all student driven by the number of students?
Well, could I ask this, can people hear what she said now? Eduardo, is the microphone picking this up, or do we need to give her? Okay. You got it.
That doesn't.
If you could start again, please state your name and address.
Kim Rivers, 35 Salisbury Road. So my question is a couple questions. The first one is in regards to staffing levels on the 4.5% increase to tuition to the middle school. Since there's a warrant article for the new tuition agreement, it isn't a tuition increase. I'm presuming it's an increase based on the number of students. And what you're not listing on your staffing levels here, which might be helpful, would be the 7th and 8th grade in the proposed. So I'm wondering if it's the number of student increase that brings that up to the 4.5%. You have, I presume, from the number of students, what is the driver to get that 4.5%?
Question, so with regards to the increase to the Amherst School District, from a tuition standpoint, I'm sure our business administrator can answer that, but it is driven by an increase of students that have not only enrolled, but maybe in a remote modality at the middle school, who previously were homeschooled. So we saw an increase in our overall tuition students to the Amherst School District.
So how many more students are we going to have going there next year than this year? Because that amount is at $251,000. So
Michelle, do you have any idea?
The increase is a combination of an increase in the number of students, plus there was a rate increase, but there was a fairly significant increase in the number of students that would be tuition.
So how many more, so that's my question, how many more students are in this $251,000? Or is it based on our previous agreement that Amherst Middle School did some improvements and Mont Vernon is responsible for that portion of it? So I'd like to know what the difference is on that. If we have,
Great question. So it's with regards to the number of students that we're going to be tuitioning at an estimated level next year. It does not include capital projects that the town of Amherst is currently contemplating. It is not going towards any of those dollars at this point. The current tuition agreement requires that that number be reset, I believe, on a monthly basis, in terms of the cost per pupil calculation, the average daily attendance, every single month that goes through. And so that's the number that we're using with regards to the budget. Is that correct? The tuition agreement that we're going to talk to in a couple of minutes is going to change some of that, hopefully for the better, beginning in the following fiscal year.
and so that's a new way of doing it. It wasn't addressed monthly before. That was based on the Department of Revenue. It wasn't done on a monthly basis before, so that.
There's another 14 students that were tuitioned over this year.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to make sure that that estimated amount there is not part of what the tuition agreement is or the new tuition agreement. Right. And then the other question that I would have is based on the board. There's been previous discussions that the math coach and the reading interventionist were more on a part-time basis, on a cycle thing, not something that was going to be full-time. And the board addressed their thoughts as to those positions and the long term of them.
Please forgive us, Kim. It's very difficult to hear with the mask on and the microphone not being very effective. I think I heard your question asking whether or not the reading specialist and the math interventionist would be continuing in their current capacity based on the 2-teacher per grade level program. Is that correct?
No, I know it is, because it's in the budget, but what I'm wondering is what are the long-term thoughts on this? The process when they were put in there were not for long-term, full-time, for never ending. They were more on the new math program that was done, the basis on our test scores that were low. And I know we're in a COVID year, but I'm wondering from the town, from a long-term standpoint, is it a 2-year process? What is the board reviewing that again?
So I can share my personal thoughts as a single board member that I do believe that there's a lot of work that we need to do in those 2 areas. Number one, our math numbers over year from last year to this year need a lot of help, especially at our lower grade levels. Our reading numbers also receded quite a bit as a result of the COVID crisis. So as we move into 2022, 2023, those 2 positions are going to be vital to our recovery to those 2 results and those 2 scores. As we transition beyond those 2 years, that of course is something that the board is going to have to discuss at that time to figure out if it's something that's still warranted and needed. Those 2 roles, the interventionist and the math specialist, are really good at getting into classrooms. Unfortunately, this year, they're not in those capacities because we decided as a board not to hire additional staff as we moved into a remote and an in-person modality, that those 2 positions had to be forced into a teaching capacity in our remote world.
And the reason that I'm asking the board to keep that on from an agenda standpoint of a review is we're looking at class sizes of the highest at 16 and a half. And so from that standpoint, a 1 to 16 ratio is a pretty good ratio for our teachers, not knowing how many professionals are in there on a one-on-one basis. And so the expectation was when they were implemented by the boards in the past, that it was not a long-term process. Those positions were not going to be filled indefinitely forever, especially at these ratio numbers. At that point, we were talking about one class that had 26 students, and that was the thought process. So a 1 to 16 ratio, even a 1 to 14 in an upper grade is pretty beneficial to these students. So, thank you.
Thank you for your feedback.
Do we have any other comments or questions from the voters? Seeing none, I'm going to instruct the school district clerk to place warrant article number 2 on the ballot as originally worded in accordance with the state statutes.
Mr. Butler,
Yes,
I make a motion to restrict reconsideration on article number 2.
thank you. Do I have a second on that? Ms. Gooden, second. All in favor of the motion to restrict reconsideration? Raise your hand. All opposed? Motion passes. All right, now we're ready to move on. Let me read article number 3. Shall the Mont Vernon School District approve the cost items, including the collective bargaining agreement reached between the school board and the MVEA, the Mont Vernon Education Association, which calls for the following increases in salaries and benefits at the current staffing level over the amount paid in the prior fiscal year. The fiscal year 2022 would be an increase of $67,328. In 2023, it would be $67,498. 2024 would be $74,167. 2025 would be $76,247. And further, to raise and appropriate the sum of $67,328 for the 2021-22 year, each sum representing an additional cost attributable to the increase in salaries and benefits required by the new agreement over those that would be paid at the current staffing levels. The majority vote of this will be required at the election. This was recommended by the Mont Vernon School Board 5-0 and recommended by the Budget Committee 4-0. The estimated tax impact of passing this article is 21 cents per thousand. Mr. Chair, would the school board like to speak to this article?
Yeah, I'll speak to it. Thank you. This is my first time on the negotiating committee for the school board. It was a good experience for me, and I would say the same for Chairperson Lawrence. And we had good dialogue between the association and ourselves. I think we had 3 or 4 Adam Zoom negotiations, I think was what we had, and they came to us with concerns that they had regarding salary structures, and we came up with a plan that we felt addressed those needs, and they did as well. I will say that we, as a board, feel very comfortable with the staff that we have here. We also feel very comfortable with, appointments of the school board and with the school itself. And that's all great, but you only get so much talent appointments and salary. So we addressed the salary situation for the upper end of our teachers to get them closer to the surrounding communities that they and we compete with. And we felt very good about the end result. We are happy with the fact that we got a 4-year contract, and they were as well. And we're very comfortable with the estimated increase to each fiscal year's budget with the salaries that we committed to for the various steps and salaries that the teachers are going to receive.
I don't see anything from the budget committee. Open to questions or comments from the public.
I want to see if the owl works. Did the owl work?
It'll work, it'll work for the folks at home, oh, there you go. But for the folks in the room, it doesn't.
Sorry. All right. Because quite a few of the townsfolk come from out of state. Can someone explain, preferably for their benefit, how we distinguish between raises and step increases?
I think the question is how do you differentiate between a step and a rate increase?
I'm gonna let Superintendent Steele address that.
Thank you. So, in short, steps are based on experience, and raises are what everybody receives as a part of the salary table. So we have a salary table that lists by step, and steps go by experience. Every year, a teacher, while we have a collective bargaining agreement in place, moves from the step from 1 year to the step for the next year. There's usually an increase in salary associated with that step. In addition to those steps, there's also different columns for degrees. So starting with a bachelor's degree and moving up all the way to somebody that might have a doctoral degree, staff move over in those columns based on their degrees. And so a teacher's salary each year is found by going to that table, finding their degree and their appropriate number of years of experience, and that's their salary for that given year. A raise is what's added to the entire salary table for that particular year. So it could be that a teacher gets a step, and in addition to a step, that salary is also increased by a raise amount for that given school year. And then there are teachers who get to the very last step and no longer get steps. And more than half of our teachers at Mont Vernon are at that spot where they're no longer receiving step increases, only whatever raise is appropriated to the salary table. Does that help?
Thank you.
Kim Rivers, 35 Salisbury Road. So cost of living increase, can you tell us what it is for each one of those? I know you said it was a raise, but it's really the cost of living increase for the 22, 23, 24, and 25 year. And then Mr. Eckhoff stated that we're doing something for the teachers that were at the higher echelon, which meant they would have reached their maximum step. Are they receiving an additional payout that's a lump sum yearly as to what comes up with that? And then what also does it for the benefit of benefits? What changed?
Thank you. So for each of the 4 years, it's exactly the same increase to the salary table. It's a 0.5 percentage point increase to the entire salary table for each year for 4 years. However, there's something else that's going on in this contract that's somewhat unique. When we studied the surrounding school districts and compared the Mont Vernon salaries, we saw that our starting teacher salary was very competitive. And we actually saw that our middle of the salary table was also fairly competitive, but it was really the top of our salary schedule for our most experienced teachers was not. And so there's several ways to address that. What we did not want to do is make the last step get a significantly higher raise than everybody else in the salary table, because then that's a huge increase when someone gets to that top step. And so instead what is done is starting with step 6 of the 15-step salary table, there's an additional amount in addition to the 0.5 percentage point salary increase that's added, starting with an extra 0.2% and going all the way up to the very top step that gets an additional 2%. So the top step of the salary table gets a 2.5% increase every year for 4 years. The second to last step gets a 2.3% increase each year for each of 4 years, all the way down to step 6, that gets a 0.7% increase. And then below step 6, those teachers get the 0.5% raise, cost of living increase, each of 4 years. All 4 years are the same. There is no change to the benefits, primarily the health insurance benefit or the dental insurance benefit that's in the existing contract. It is already I believe, the most taxpayer-friendly split between what the district pays and what the teachers pay of any district in the SAU and of the surrounding area that we studied. So that was not changed. It still remains highly beneficial to us as taxpayers. Thank you.
Additional questions? That's right. I forgot to tell you to state your name.
I know,
think we all know that we need your 15 weeks of road.
Thank you. Okay. I tried comparing our teacher salary schedule with Milford's and Amherst, but the steps vary as do the educational incentives. It is interesting to note that in both districts, not all educational levels continue to step 15 as ours do. In fact, in Amherst, let me see if I can grab it. In Amherst, the first step for bachelor's stops at step 11. Ours continues to step 15. So let's just look at ours. You notice, wait a minute. It's interesting that the wage for a step 1 teacher with a bachelor's degree will raise by 1.5% over the 4 years. The difference between year 1 and year 4 is 1.5%. With a teacher at step 15 with a BA, their salaries will increase by 7.7% over the 4 years. Because you have figuratively frozen base pay at the 2021 level, the disparity in pay increases. Remember that teachers with more than 15 years experience get the benefit of the raise to the level step 15. It is obvious to me that the proposed contract favored the teachers with 6 or more years of teaching experience. Of the list of professional staff in the 2019 town report, 18 of 26 persons are in that upper range. And if they all return again, then that number is even greater. This contract is unfair to those with the least experience. Therefore, we should vote no on June 8th and ask for renegotiation.
Thank you. Are there further comments from the public? Ask the board to move to propose a ballot question as printed in the deliberative session information package, along with recommendation of the school board and the budget committee, attendance be placed on the ballot. Do you have a motion for that?
Runner, I make a motion that we put Article 3 on the ballot.
By Mr. Eckhoff, second by Mr. O'Keefe. You don't need to vote on that. I'll instruct the school district clerk to place the warrant article on the ballot as it is according to the state statutes. And now I'll ask for a motion to restrict reconsideration. Mr. O'Keefe, please. The motion has been made by Mr. O'Keefe, seconded. Mr. Eckhoff, all in favor of restricting reconsideration of Article 3, raise your blue card. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Moving on, Article 5. Good. 4. Oh yeah, I just skipped that one. Okay, Article 4. shall the school district approve a new 5-year tuition agreement with the Amherst School District to allow for the continued education of 100 students at the Amherst Middle School beginning July 1st, 2021, in accordance with the proposed tuition agreement on file with the school district clerk. Majority vote is required. This is recommended by the Mont Vernon School Board 5-0, and recommended by the Budget Committee 4-0. The board would like to speak to this article.
Mr. O'Keefe was on that committee, he has to speak to it. Steve?
Great, thank you. I can share with you that myself and Chairwoman Lawrence had an opportunity to meet with our counterparts in the Amherst School District to renegotiate what I believe is a very fair contract to the taxpayers of the town of Mont Vernon. And I'll share with you a couple of reasons why I feel that way. So the current tuition agreement with the town of Amherst, it was a 10-year tuition agreement that basically created a calculation that was a modified cost per pupil calculation that was calculated 5 times a year based on average daily attendance. And what that did is that created a lot of budgeting woes and inability to properly budget between now and the end of the year what the actual tuition costs will be, and setting us up for a situation where we may have a deficit spending situation. And there's no better year to articulate that than the 2021 calendar year, where we saw an influx of tuition kids over to the town of Amherst that almost caused us to go into a deficit for this calendar year. And so one of the things that are at the front of our mind is how do we create more consistency and structure to that number, so throughout the budget year we can make modifications between now and the end of the year based on one calculation. We'll get to that in just a moment. And what we feel is that the current way, as you can see articulated here on the slide, that it just didn't allow for an accurate budgeting process, not only for us, but also our counterparts down the hill, where they then ended up having to worry about how much tuition they're going to receive from the town of Mont Vernon, and budgeting up or down based on their particular needs. And so a couple of things that were also on our mind is, number one, we know our neighbors down the hill are going to be working on some pretty sizable capital expenses over the course of the next year to year and a half. One of those is a rather sizable building renovation project that I'm sure we've all read about or heard about from our friends. That project is still up in the air from a taxpayer standpoint, and we as the town of Mont Vernon felt that entering into a new 10-year obligation that would require us to participate in a rather sizable capital cost to that building without having any say, we felt that a 5-year contract was a lot more appropriate because it allowed us to better understand not only what their taxpayers approved, but create a planning structure for us as a community on how we're going to respond to that. And so the new contract actually allows for not only a 5-year commitment, but an agreement that allows us to opt in at the school board level for another 5 years if things go in a way that we feel are going to be beneficial to the community. We also readdressed or reassessed the tuition calculation, basically coming up with an average of the last 2 years cost per pupil calculation and putting a cap in there. So I know Ms. Neighbor at our public hearing a couple of months back asked a question whether or not it was per pupil or per the entire district being capped at that. It is per pupil. And that cap was the largest increase that we saw over the last 5 years, which is a 5.6% increase. And what we felt at the time, the 5.6% increase cap was sufficient enough because we are frequently subject to negotiations with the union in the town of Amherst without having any say or position at the table. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to come up with an average. So a 2-year average would be actually the tuition base for the following year with that cap of 5.6. And we would use an October 1st enrollment period to actually set that tuition dollar amount. That creates a lot of consistency from a budgeting standpoint for our community as we navigate the tough months of January, February, March, and April, as we see expenses either increase or decrease based on needs throughout the calendar year. It also provides a phase-out program should the town of Mont Vernon wish to exit out of the agreement. Should we decide to do something different, go to another community, decide to do something in our community, it created a plan so our 7th graders could phase out through their middle school program without having to reshuffle or reshift their current need. There are a couple things that are actually also not on the slide that I want to share with you from a qualitative standpoint that I think Chairwoman Lawrence and I felt very important. And there are basically 4 qualitative issues that we wanted included in the contract. Number one, we wanted to make sure that testing reports were sent back to the Mont Vernon School District so we can then identify areas that needed special attention. We can identify gaps, deficiencies, and things that we can have our community work on. We also wanted to create a greater synergy between our 6th grade educational experience and the town of Amherst's 6th grade educational experience by mandating a couple of things. First, 2 curriculum assignments are mandated as part of the tuition agreement to allow better coordination and cohesive experience between our 6th grade and the Amherst 6th grade. And that will allow either in person or via Zoom or some sort of collaboration so our kids can better get to know each other in the course of their 6th grade year here. We also wanted to make sure that our educators at the 6th grade level were included in the professional development program at the Amherst Middle School. And so they would be collaborating as a part of the agreement from an educational experience to improve and increase their abilities here to our community. That way we can make sure our curriculums are on par. And so when our 7th graders transition into the middle school, it's much more seamless from a curriculum standpoint. And then third, as a board, we also wanted to address the emotional social side as well. And that's making sure that the transition, which I know several parents have come to me in the past about, have created some concerns or some questions about the consistency in that area. So our 6th graders have a better transition into the middle school. And so that process is now articulated in the agreement that will create a mandatory one-on-one check-in with all of our 6th grade students once they arrive at the Amherst Middle School in the months of September and the beginning of October. That one-on-one check-in would then identify students that were having struggles and needed issues addressed by the counseling staff and the career folks down at the Amherst Middle School. Today, that's done more in a collaborative, get all of our kids in one room and say, how's everyone feeling? And our feeling at the time was that we don't identify all the kids in that type of environment because someone may be a little bit anxious or not willing to speak up. The town of Amherst Middle School administration will then report back to the Mont Vernon School District every November going forward about the results of that process and articulate things that we need to improve upon here on the Hill to make sure that our 6th and 7th graders have the best experience possible. So those are several reasons why I believe the tuition agreement not only deserves a yes vote, but I think it's the best interest of our community as we navigate all the challenging things going to be in front of us from a middle school education standpoint.
Thank you, Mr. Pete. Do we have any comments or questions from the public? Okay. I'll ask the board to, oh, I'm sorry.
Eileen Neighbor. I know in previous years, we have had students from Amherst coming into our elementary school, kindergarten, 1st grade, and had a reciprocal agreement in reduction in the amount of, tuition exchange between. Are we still doing that? And how many?
Well, great question. So our community opened its doors to the town of Amherst when they had some building issues at their lower grade levels several years ago. And as a board, we agreed to allow those students to continue through their educational experience through the end of their 6th grade if the town of Amherst was willing to continue paying tuition. Today, we have 3 students that are still participating in that program. And so we're receiving a tuition reimbursement as a result of us sending our kids down to the Amherst Middle School and vice versa, them sending those 3 students up to us.
In reverse 35 Salisbury Road. So I like the idea of a 5-year contract. I also like the idea of thinking outside the box based on the tuition. My concern, though, on what you said was that it's 5-year and that the board is allowed to opt in after 5 years. That means that that agreement doesn't come back to the voters. We'll be having a public hearing on that. So I'm not necessarily sure as a voter that I'm sold on this method yet to have any history as to how that's going to work for a taxpayer in that cost. as you showed us on your line screen, is the cost to the town of Mont Vernon for the village school, $6 million almost, that half of it or about that is on salaries or tuition to the middle school. And so therefore, I think allowing the board to opt in on it after 5 years is risky to us as taxpayers.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. And let me explain why we chose the 5-year period. So not only were the capital costs a concern to us as a board, but also that very issue that you brought up, that this is a new way of calculating our tuition. So if we go into year 3 or year 4 and we realize that this is just not in the best interest of our community, we'll then have the door open to renegotiate. But if it is something that's working for our community, it's going quite well, and the costs are actually then in check at that point, we have an opportunity as a board to go ahead and allow that contract to be extended for another 5 years. And I can convince you as a board member, of course, that's going to be something that's going to be extremely transparent. It's going to be subject to public conversation, board meetings, inviting committee members such as yourself to articulate your concerns and your questions, and then a vote will take place in the public.
So having said that, I guess I would hope that that would be something that before the board makes a decision, that you have some type of public hearing like this, not just at a board meeting. There's a lot of board meetings that I've attended, but that's something that is a large percentage of the cost of the tax impact to the town. We can't all debate, so I'm right on. I can't change that. You would have to. We can't make a motion to amend something that they negotiated from a contract. We could state that we wanted to vote it down, which I don't want to because I like the idea, but I think that's not a good play to the taxpayers. I understand the purpose of it, Mr. O'Keefe, but having said that, there's two things going on here, right? You're doing a 5-year contract, you're changing the way it's done, and you're doing that based on what is the capital expenditures that they're going to have down there, but also how our tuition is. So I think there's a risk two ways.
Great point. When we take a look at what happens with this particular contract at its expiration, it expires. We're then thrown back into the negotiation table. So if as a community, we felt that we did not want to empower the board to make the decision to allow a 5-year extension, this community can come to the board and say, we are not willing or wanting you to do that. And then this board, the board at the time that's seated, will then actually go back to the negotiation table to renegotiate a new contract with the town of Amherst. And there's one more thing, Selectman Roberge, that I did not add in my comments, and that comes down to the paraprofessional piece. One thing that's really attractive about this contract is we are no longer going to be billed for individual paraprofessionals at the middle school. It's going to be rolled up into the average cost per student calculation. So there's going to be no surprises about a student in November or October, I'm sorry, in April or in May that now needs additional support with a parent that's going to be incorporated all within that cost per pupil calculation, subject to that cap and that rise. That was another thing that we negotiated into the contract. And I will commit that this board will hold a public hearing.
You refer to capital costs. How do Amherst capital costs figure into our tuition agreement?
Ms. Gabriel, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send the tuition agreement over to Michelle here. It's listed on the SAU website as well. And inside that tuition agreement, there is a clause that basically uses a calculation based on the average students. A bonding issue stretched out over 25 or 50 years for existing, and I believe it's under 30 or 20 years for new capital costs. It's structured inside the plan. We did not change the language to those line items in the new agreement on purpose and intent, because we wanted to get a better understanding what the town of Amherst would be doing from a capital cost.
Where do I find that?
Right on the SAU website under the tuition agreement. It should be right on the face page. If not, it will be there tomorrow.
Mr. Keith, may I ask a question, which Mr. Roberge is question, I'm not sure if it was clear, but I think what I understood, there may be a concern that we're approving a 5-year contract, but then we're allowing the board to renegotiate in 5 years. So my question is, as a voter, in 5 years, would you renegotiate without voter approval, or do you have an agreement in place that you could extend based on the agreement we're going to enter this year? Thank you.
Great question. Mr. King, what happened in that particular scenario is the contract as written will expire at the end of the 5th year. So if nothing is done by either board, we need to re-enter into negotiations. If each board decides, you know what, negotiations are not necessary, we're very confident, comfortable with what's going on. And this board, as I committed, will have a public hearing to solicit the community feedback to see if that is the most appropriate approach. Both boards then by action can say, you know what, we do agree with the current contract. We want to continue it again for another 5 years. And at the end of that 5th year, that second term, there is no extension unless both boards approve and it comes back to the taxpayer for a vote at town meeting.
Any further questions? Board move that the proposed ballot question for the warrant article number 4 is printed into the board session information package, along with recommendation of the school board and budget committee, if any, be placed on the ballot. Board move that.
I'll make a motion that Article 4 would be put on for a vote. As an article.
Okay.
On the ballot.
That's moved by Mr. Eckhoff, a second. Ms. Hinckley. That being said, I'll instruct the clerk to place warrant article number 4 on the ballot as originally worded.
Mr. King, just a point of information.
Yes.
Ms. Roberge, our legal counsel has instructed me just now that this would have to come back to the taxpayer in this format, in this style, to allow a 5-year extension.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We just moved that. We haven't voted on this, is that correct? No, we didn't. Okay. Do I have a motion to restrict reconsideration? Mr. O'Keefe, the second. Ms. Hinckley, all in favor? Here's your blue card. Say aye. All opposed? The motion passes. Under article number 5. Shall the Mont Vernon School District raise and appropriate a sum of up to $50,000 to be added to the school property maintenance expendable trust fund established in March 2007, with said sum to come from the June 30th, 2021 year unassigned fund balance or surplus available for transfer July 1st, 2021. No amount will be raised from new taxation. The majority vote will be required. This was recommended by the school board 5-0, recommended by the budget committee 4-0. The estimated tax impact of passing this is $0.00 per thousand, and the tax impact if this is not passed is negative 16 cents per thousand. Would like to comment on 5?
Thank you, Mr. King. And as stated, this is something that the board has actually brought to the community each year since I've been a member of the board. It's just an opportunity for us to put money on the side to take care of some pretty sizable capital costs to take care of this great building. I can share with you from a infrastructure and a maintenance standpoint, this is the best building in the entire district. Our superintendent has evaluated all of our buildings over the last 2 years, and we have green dots across the board, which show that this community really cares about this place, and not only that, we'll take care of it. And this is just a part of our ongoing commitment to make sure that as an issue arises, we address it immediately. And this particular capital reserve position allows us to go ahead and do that. This particular year, our outstanding buildings and grounds folks have negotiated a conversation with a roofer to replace the roof here this upcoming summer. In addition to that, we're trying to replace the HVAC equipment within inside the building that is aging and at almost the end of life. And so replacing those 2 big issues are going to completely wipe out our capital reserve that's currently in file. And so this $50,000 contribution is going to allow us to not only finish up those 2 projects, but allow us to start saving for the next things. We have a playground that's becoming quite old. We have that wall that we're going to seek some funding from the town trustees of the trust fund. If that's denied, we need to still come up with the funding from somewhere. In addition to that, we're going to need to start talking about replacing chairs in large quantities, replacing ceiling tiles, replacing lighting. All of those things happen over an extended period of time. We've done a great job keeping up with the infrastructure here. We just want to continue that outstanding approach. It's completely proven to be fruitful for us, which is great.
Thank you. Comments from the public? If the board wants to move to propose a ballot question. Move that the proposed ballot question for the warrant article number 5 as printed in the deliberative session information document along with recommendations to the board and budget committee if any placed on the ballot. Board will do that.
I'll move that article not be put on the ballot.
By Mr. Eckhart, second. From Mr. O'Keefe. I'll instruct the clerk to place that on the place warrant article number 5 on the ballot as ordered in accordance with the state statutes and for a motion to restrict reconsideration of article 5. Mr. O'Keefe makes the motion, Ms. Hinckley seconds. All in favor of the motion to restrict reconsideration? All opposed, the motion carries. Opposed to the discussion of the articles. Is there any other business to come before this meeting? I recognize Mr. O'Keefe.
Mr. Moderator, thank you. Two very quick things. If folks did not attend our public meeting before, we did receive a resignation letter from Mr. St. Dennis on the school board. And we are now looking for outstanding members of our community to step forward and assist us in the same exact thing that we did this evening. It's a great experience, and for those watching at home, it's a great way to give back to the community in a way that we've never thought of in the past. Yes, it does take some time, but it's extremely rewarding at the same time. So thank you to Mr. St. Dennis for the time he gave us, and we're looking forward to seeing some folks step forward and submit their application. I'll stop by Miss Neighbor's house tomorrow to see if she can give me hers, and we'll see if we can get somebody to come and join us. Number 2, the one thing I wanted to mention and recognize publicly in this forum is a longtime employee of this building who is leaving us, and that's Miss Charlotte Jameson. She announced her retirement actually effective at the end of the year, and after many years of service to not only our community as a community member, as a police officer over in the town of Wynborough, she's watching at home. I remember those days, and then also working right here in our front office, welcoming kids on a daily basis, and actually making an impact in our community that is unmeasurable. So as a board member, as a member of the community, I want to thank her for her service. And we can give her a round of applause so folks at home can see how much we appreciate her here.
Thanks. I just have a couple thoughts as well. Just to be clear, there are 2 spots open on the ballot for school board. Those are 2 positions. There's not an opportunity to put another write-in for this 3rd position to fill for the year, because we have a resignation of someone who is not up for re-election. It's too late to put it on the ballot, but the board is asking for, I guess, letters of interest, and they will choose. That's the way that works.
When does that expire? When does his term
When-
expire?
He's been on 1 year. That's right. So it would just be an appointment for 1 year. Yeah, till the next ballot. The second thing, I'd just like to just make a statement that for me to hear that this is the best maintained building in the district is really something. 20-something years ago, when I was really involved, my kids were living in this. 2003 was not a good year. We closed the school for 2 weeks. 2 weeks because the roof was leaking in every single classroom. There were 55-gallon buckets full of water in every single classroom, dripping leaking ceilings, leaking walls, broken pipes, you name it. We covered the entire roof with blue tar, something I wasn't proud of. And the board at that time made a commitment that this building is going to be maintained shortly after we started the expendable trust. And, I think the board and the successive boards and this board have done a fantastic job. And I am proud of this building. Thank you. Thank you to the board and the administration. And with that, I'll ask, is there any other comments or questions from the public? Once again, I thank you all for coming. Thank you. Good night. I call the meeting to close.